My brother called me a financial amateur moments before toasting his funding round, and the whole dinner table laughed. They looked at me like I was book smart but useless. But exactly 1 week later, his company's capital didn't just shrink, it evaporated from the negotiation table in silence. And the person signing the term sheet to save his life was the one person he never saw coming. My name is Alice Ross, and if you asked my family to describe me in one word, they would probably choose safe. Not safe as in reliable, but safe as in uninspired. Safe as in the kind of person who drives a 5-year-old sedan, rents a modest condo in a flyover state, and works a job that sounds suspiciously like a government archive. To the Ross family, safe is just a polite synonym for mediocre. I had flown in from Milwaukee to Phoenix that morning, taking the cheap flight with a layover in Denver because that is what Alice Ross does. I rented a compact economy car at Sky Harbor Airport and drove 40 minutes east to Scottsdale, watching the landscape shift from dusty highway to the manicured, thirsty green of high-end suburbia. My parents' house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a gated community where the palm trees were trimmed with laser precision and the silence was heavy with money. It was a sprawling Mediterranean-style compound that looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to keep reality at bay. Sunday dinner at the Ross household was not a meal. It was a board meeting with brisket. It was a performance review where the KPIs were personal net worth and social standing, and I was perpetually on a performance improvement plan. I parked my rental car behind my father's Range Rover and took a breath of the dry Arizona heat. It was over 100 degrees, dry enough to crack your lips, but inside, I knew the thermostat would be set to a frigid 68. I walked in, and the air conditioning hit me like a physical wall. "Alice, you made it," my mother said, appearing from the kitchen. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car, holding a glass of Chardonnay with a stem so thin it looked ready to snap. She offered me her cheek, a greeting that ensured no lipstick was smudged and no real warmth was exchanged. "Gavin is already on the patio with your father. They are celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. With Gavin, we were always celebrating something: a new hire, a press release, a meeting that went well, a meeting that went badly but was spun to look like it went well. "Big things, honey, big things," she said, her eyes already drifting past me. "You look tired. Are you eating enough? You look like you are living on frozen dinners." "I cook, Mom," I said, placing my bag on the side table. "Well, come on out. Don't keep the men waiting." We walked out to the patio. It was an expansive outdoor living space with a built-in grill the size of a small car, overlooking a pool that shimmered unnatural turquoise in the twilight. My father, Robert Ross, sat at the head of the teak dining table, looking like a man who had successfully conquered his slice of the world, and to his right sat Gavin. Gavin Ross was 39 years old, 6 years my senior, and he vibrated with the frantic energy of a man who believed his own press release. He was tan, fit in that Peloton and protein shake way, and dressed in the uniform of the modern tech founder, a $200 t-shirt and designer sneakers that had never touched a gym floor. "There she is," Gavin boomed, raising a glass of scotch. "The professor arrives." "I'm not a professor, Gavin," I said, taking my usual seat at the far end of the table, opposite my mother and safely out of the direct line of fire. "Researcher, analyst, policy nerd." "Same bucket," Gavin said, dismissing my career with a wave of his hand. "Good to see you. Really, how is Milwaukee still cold and boring?" "It is affordable," I said, unfolding my napkin. "And quiet." "Quiet is death," Gavin said, leaning forward. His eyes were wide, dilated with adrenaline or caffeine, or just the sheer high of being Gavin Ross. "You have to be where the noise is. Alice, that is where the money is. Noise is friction, and friction creates value." My father chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of approval. "He is right. You know, you can't hunt if you stay in the cave." Dinner was served by the housekeeper, thick slabs of roast beef, scalloped potatoes, glazed carrots, heavy food for a hot climate, but my father liked his meals substantial. As we ate, the conversation inevitably turned to the only subject that mattered in this house, Gavin's company. For the last 3 years, Gavin had been building a fintech startup called Vantagrid. If you listened to him, it was going to revolutionize how mid-sized enterprises handled liquidity. If you looked at the actual product, it was a glorified dashboard that aggregated banking APIs, wrapped in a sleek user interface. But in the current market, sleek user interfaces raised capital, and Gavin was very good at raising capital. "We are tracking for a massive quarter," Gavin said, cutting his meat with aggressive precision. "I just got off the phone with the guys at Sequoia. They are sniffing around. They know we are about to pop. I told them to take a ticket." "That is my boy," my father said, beaming. "Make them beg. Never sell cheap." "I am not selling at all, Dad. Not yet," Gavin said. "We are looking at a valuation of 40 million post-money on this next bridge. 40 million. And that is conservative. Once we deploy the new AI integration for the credit scoring model, we could be looking at 100 million by next Christmas." I chewed a piece of carrot slowly. I knew the numbers Gavin was throwing around were not based on revenue or EBITDA. They were based on hype. They were multiples of future promises. 40 million, my mother sighed, looking at Gavin as if he were a deity. "Can you imagine, Alice? Did you hear that your brother is building an empire?" "I heard," I said. "That is a high valuation for a company pre-profit." The table went quiet for a second. It was a small breach of protocol. I was supposed to nod and applaud. Gavin laughed. A sharp, barking sound. "See? This is why Alice stays in the library. She is obsessed with profit. Profit is for grocery stores. Alice, tech plays for growth. You capture the market first. You monetize later. It is called scaling." "Alice is just cautious," my father said, pouring more wine. "She has that government mindset. Safe, slow. It is fine for some people. Not everyone has the stomach for the big leagues." "It is not about stomach," I said, keeping my voice even. "It is about math. If your customer acquisition cost is rising while your churn rate is holding steady at 5%, scaling just means you are bleeding faster." Gavin rolled his eyes and looked at our parents, inviting them to share the joke. "Listen to her. Alice is great at calculations. She is a human calculator, but she is calculating on paper, in a vacuum, real finance, the kind that builds skyscrapers, that is about sentiment. It is about momentum. It is about narrative." "I thought it was about solvency," I said. "Alice, don't be a wet blanket," my mother snapped gently. "Gavin is doing strictly marvelously. Why do you always have to pick holes?" "I am not picking holes," I lied. "I am just interested." "She is cute," Gavin said, leaning back in his chair and stretching his arms. "Look, Alice, you are doing great with your little research papers. What is it you do again? Risk modeling for pension funds?" "Quantitative analysis for policy impact," I corrected. "Right, boring stuff." "Important, sure, like garbage collection is important. But let the adults handle the real economy. You deal with history. I am dealing with the future." I looked down at my plate. This was the dynamic. Gavin was the visionary. I was the clerk. Gavin was the lion. I was the mouse. They needed me to be the mouse because it made the lion look bigger. If I was just book smart, but street stupid, it validated every risky decision Gavin made. It made his recklessness look like bravery. "So," my father said, steering the conversation back to the glory track, "when is the big signing? You said you had a lead investor lined up for this round." "Next week," Gavin said. He took a long drink of his wine. "We have 3 term sheets on the table. 3, I am playing them off each other. By Friday, I will pick the winner. It is a survival milestone. Once this cash hits, we have 18 months of runway to burn the competition to the ground." 18 months? I asked. "At your current burn rate." Gavin paused. The glass hovered near his mouth. "Yes. Why?" "I read your press release about the new office in Austin," I said. and the expansion of the sales team to 50 heads, and the marketing blitz for the Super Bowl pre-roll spots. If you are doing all that, your monthly burn must be close to $700,000. Gavin lowered his glass. His smile didn't fade, but it grew tight around the edges. You have been doing your homework. It is public information, mostly, I said. If you are burning $700,000 a month and you are raising $5 million, that is not 18 months, that is 7 months, maybe 6 if you account for the severance packages for the executives you just fired. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of polite tolerance. It was the silence of a needle scratching across a record. My father frowned. Executives, you fired people. Gavin, restructuring. Dad. Trimming the fat, Gavin said quickly, shooting a glare at me. Then he turned his full attention to me, his expression shifting from annoyance to pity. You know, this is your problem. Alice, you look at a burn rate and you see a cost. I look at a burn rate and I see fuel. We are a rocket ship. Rockets burn fuel. If you don't burn, you don't escape gravity. Gravity always wins eventually, I said. If you run out of fuel before orbit, Gavin laughed again. But this time it was louder, forced. He looked around the table, rallying his audience. Oh my God, you are priceless. Alice, you are a total financial amateur. You know that. You read a textbook once 10 years ago and think you know how venture capital works. Stick to your coupons and your 401k. Okay, leave the heavy lifting to us. Financial amateur, I repeated, tasting the words. Yes, Gavin said, grinning. Amateur, it is not an insult, Al. It just means you do it for love, not for money. Or in your case, you do it for whatever it is you do it for. Safety. My father laughed. She is a smart girl, Gavin. Don't be too hard on her. She doesn't have the instinct. You know, some people have the nose for money. Some people don't. Alice is academic. It is a different kind of brain. Exactly, Gavin said. Academic, useless in a street fight, but great for solving puzzles on a Sunday afternoon. I looked at them. I looked at my brother, whose entire self-worth was pinned to a valuation that existed only in a spreadsheet. I looked at my father, who saw me as a defective version of himself, and I looked at my mother, who just wanted everyone to agree that the roast beef was excellent. In my head, I wasn't seeing a family dinner. I was seeing a chart. I was seeing Vantigrid's cash flow statement, which I had reconstructed from their hiring data and vendor leaks. I saw a line plunging straight down into the red. I saw a liquidity crisis that was exactly 8 weeks away. I saw a company that was technically insolvent, being propped up by charisma and bridge loans. But I didn't say any of that. I simply picked up my knife and fork. I cut a perfect square of roast beef. I chewed. I swallowed. You are probably right, I said softly. I don't understand the new economy. The tension broke instantly. I had submitted. The hierarchy was restored. There is no shame in that, my father said magnanimously. We can't all be captains of industry. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of self-congratulation. Gavin listed the cars he was planning to buy. He talked about the penthouse he was looking at in Austin. He talked about disruption until the word lost all meaning. When the meal was over, we walked out to the driveway. The desert air had cooled slightly, but the ground still radiated heat. My father walked over to Gavin and pulled a set of keys from his pocket. He tossed them through the air, and Gavin caught them with a practiced snatch of his hand. The new Porsche, my father said. I'm not driving it enough. It is just sitting in the third garage gathering dust. You take it. Consider it a closing bonus for the deal next week. Gavin looked at the keys, then at the sleek 911 parked in the shadows. Dad, are you serious? This is a beast. It fits you, my father said, clapping him on the shoulder. A CEO needs a proper ride. They admired the car for a moment, kicking the tires, talking about horsepower and torque. I stood by my rented economy car, holding my keys. My father turned to me, as if suddenly remembering I was there. He looked at my rental, then at my sensible shoes, then at my face. His expression softened into that familiar, crushing pity. "You doing okay, Alice?" he asked. "I am fine, Dad. I mean, really. You have enough for everything. Milwaukee is cheap, I know. But if you are ever tight on rent, or if you need to upgrade this," he gestured vaguely at my rental car. "Situation. You just say the word. Okay, I know government grants don't pay much." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. For a second, I thought he was going to hand me cash, like I was a teenager. He hesitated, then pulled out $100 bill and tried to tuck it into my hand. "For gas," he said, "or a nice dinner. Treat yourself to something that isn't frozen." I looked at the bill, then I looked at Gavin, who was revving the engine of the Porsche, the roar echoing off the canyon walls. "Thanks, Dad," I said, taking the money. "I will try not to spend it all in one place." "Drive safe," he said, "and try to be happy for your brother. Alice, jealousy is a wasted emotion." "I am not jealous," I said, and for the first time that night, I was telling the absolute truth. "I am just watching." I got into my car and backed out of the driveway. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see them standing under the floodlights, the golden son and the proud father, laughing as they admired the machine. They looked invincible. They had no idea that the road ahead ended in a cliff, and they were driving straight for it at 100 miles per hour, and the financial amateur they had just laughed at was the only one who had a map. Milwaukee in November is the chromatic opposite of Scottsdale. The sky is the color of wet concrete. The wind off Lake Michigan cuts through wool coats like a razor, and the city does not care about your net worth. It only cares if you have a shovel for the snow. I live in a one-bedroom condo on the east side. It is a sensible building. The brick is weathered. The lobby smells faintly of floor wax and old mail, and the rent is exactly $1,400 a month. My neighbors are dental hygienists, retired teachers, and mid-level insurance adjusters. They know me as Alice, the quiet woman from Unit 304 who drives a gray sedan with 60,000 miles on the odometer and brings a turkey sandwich to work every day in a reusable container. To my family, this life is a tragedy. They see my IKEA bookshelf and my lack of designer handbags as evidence that I have failed to launch. They think I am scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck on a researcher's salary, and they are half right. I do live on my researcher's salary. Every cent of my rent, my groceries, and my gas comes from the bi-weekly deposit from the Institute for Fiscal Policy. What they do not know, and what I have taken great pains to ensure they never discover, is that the salary is irrelevant. It is a rounding error. My real work happens in the silence of the early morning, usually between 4 and 6 o'clock, before I even shower for my day job. I sit at a desk that looks ordinary, but hides a dedicated fiber optic line and a secure server rack in the closet. 10 years ago, while I was finishing my master's degree in applied mathematics, I noticed an inefficiency in how municipal bond yields were priced against certain inflation derivatives. It was a small crack in the pavement of the market. Most people walked right over it. I wrote a script to exploit it. I started with $5,000 of student loan money. Within 6 months, it was $50,000. Within 2 years, I had built a proprietary algorithmic trading system that didn't just look for cracks. It mapped the entire structural integrity of the market. I did not buy Ferraris. I did not pop bottles of champagne. I reinvested. I compounded. I built a fortress of capital so dense and so quiet that it was invisible to the naked eye. I called it Northline Strategies. The name was deliberately boring. It sounds like a company that sells cardboard boxes or manages freight logistics in the Midwest. It does not sound like a private equity vehicle managing a portfolio in the mid-8 figures. Northline has no website. It has no glossy brochure. It has a registered agent in Delaware and a mailing address in a nondescript office park in Chicago. And it has exactly one employee other than myself, Mara Keene. Mara is the only person on earth who knows the truth about Alice Ross. She is 52 years old. a former compliance officer for a major investment bank who got tired of watching boys in fleece vests gamble with pension money. I hired her 5 years ago to be the face of Northline. When a document needs signing, Mara signs it. When a lawyer needs to be spoken to, Mara speaks to them. She is my firewall. That Tuesday, 2 days after the disastrous dinner in Scottsdale, I met Mara for coffee at a diner near the river. We did not meet in high-end steakhouses. We liked this place because the coffee was bitter, the eggs were cheap, and nobody looked at us. The emerging market hedge funds are up 12% this quarter, Mara said, sliding a manila folder across the Formica table. She spoke in a low, even tone, blending in with the clatter of silverware and the hiss of the espresso machine. Do you want to rebalance? We are getting a little heavy on the international side. I opened the folder. The numbers were neat. Orderly rows of black ink. There was no red. Let it ride for another 2 weeks, I said, scanning the volatility index. The European Central Bank is going to announce a rate decision on Thursday. The market is pricing in a cut, but the data suggests they will hold. If they hold, the currency pairs will spike. We sell then. Mara nodded and made a note. Understood. By the way, the acquisition of that logistics firm in Ohio closed yesterday. You now own a majority stake in a trucking fleet. Congratulations. You are a shipping magnate. I am a silent partner, I corrected her. Does the management team know who I am? They know they were bought by Northline Strategies. They think Northline is a boring institutional fund managed by a board of gray-haired men. They have no idea it is a woman eating dry toast in Milwaukee. I took a bite of my toast. It was dry, and I liked it that way. This was the fundamental difference between my brother and me. Gavin needed the world to know he was rich before he actually was. He bought the lifestyle to prove the success. I viewed wealth as a utility. It was not jewelry to be worn. It was a tool to be used. It was leverage. It was freedom. The Ross family game of comparing cars and square footage exhausted me. I had opted out of the competition not because I couldn't win, but because I had already won a different game entirely, and I didn't want to explain the rules to them. How was the family reunion? Mara asked, watching me over the rim of her mug. She knew the answer. She always knew. Expensive, I said. Not in money, in patience. Gavin is raising a bridge round. Again, didn't he just close a Series A 18 months ago? He burned it, I said. He is running on fumes. He told the table he has 3 term sheets lined up. Mara raised an eyebrow. Does he? I doubt it. I think he has 3 meetings lined up, in Gavin's language. A meeting is a handshake, and a handshake is a wire transfer. He confuses interest with commitment. And you didn't say anything. I was told I am a financial amateur, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. I was told to leave the finance to the experts, Mara snorted. The expert who is burning cash while you are sitting on a portfolio that beats the SP 500 by double digits annually. Family dynamics are fascinating. It keeps me humble, I said. After breakfast, I went to my real job at the Institute. I spent 8 hours staring at spreadsheets regarding municipal bond risk factors for state pension funds. It was dull, repetitive work, and I loved it. It was grounding. It reminded me that for most people, money was a scarce resource, something to be protected and feared. But while I worked, I had a second window open on my laptop, hidden behind a wall of PDF reports. It was my dashboard on Vantigrid. I couldn't see their internal bank accounts, of course, but in the digital age, companies bleed data if you know where to look. I monitored their LinkedIn page. In the last month, they had hired 6 new sales directors. That was aggressive. But in the same month, 2 senior engineers and the vice president of product had updated their profiles to open to work. Engineers do not leave a rocket ship right before a big funding round. They stay for the equity. If the engineers are leaving, the product is broken. I checked the advertising databases. Vantigrid was spending nearly $50,000 a week on LinkedIn and Google Ads targeting enterprise clients. The ad copy was desperate. It promised instant integration and 0 fees for the first year. Zero fees. They were buying revenue. They were bringing in customers at 100% loss just to pump up the user numbers for the investors. I sat back in my ergonomic office chair, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The picture was clear. Gavin wasn't building a business. He was building a balloon. He was obsessed with the valuation number $40 million, $50 million. He needed that number to be high so he could feel tall. He didn't care that the foundation was made of wet sand. He was trying to bridge the gap between reality and his ego with other people's money. I pulled up a text message window on my phone. I navigated to Gavin's contact. The last message from him was a meme about cryptocurrency he had sent 3 months ago. My thumbs hovered over the keypad. I typed Gavin. I looked at the market comps. The liquidity crunch is tightening for fintech. If you are buying revenue with zero-fee offers, the due diligence teams will catch it. Do not sign a term sheet that has a liquidation preference over 1 times. If you need a bridge, cut the ad spend and freeze hiring today. You do not have the leverage you think you have. I stared at the message. It was sound advice. It was professional advice. It was the kind of advice people paid Northline Strategies $10,000 an hour to receive. I imagined Gavin reading it. I could hear his voice in my head. "Oh, look, the amateur is giving advice. Did you read that in a textbook? Alice, stick to your savings bonds." He would laugh. He would show it to our father. They would shake their heads at my risk aversion, at my small-minded fear. He would view my warning not as love, but as jealousy. He would think I wanted him to fail because I couldn't understand his vision. He wouldn't listen. He would just accelerate the car to prove me wrong. I held my finger over the send button for a long 10 seconds. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse in the gray afternoon. Then, I pressed the backspace key. I deleted the warning about the liquidation preference. I deleted the advice about the ad spend. I deleted the plea to freeze hiring. I watched the letters vanish one by one until the text box was empty again. I put the phone face down on the desk. "You are right, Gavin," I whispered to the empty office. "I am just an amateur. You are the expert." I turned back to my report on municipal bonds. The numbers on my screen were safe. They didn't have egos. They didn't lie. If Gavin wanted to drive off a cliff, that was his choice. I had a map, but I was done trying to hand it to a man who refused to open his eyes. I would just wait at the bottom of the ravine, because eventually, gravity always wins. And when the crash happened, Northline Strategies would be ready, not to catch him, but to buy the wreckage. The text message from Gavin arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, vibrating against the wood of my desk in Milwaukee. It was not a text, actually, but a link to a press release draft hosted on a private server, accompanied by a row of champagne bottle emojis. Enterprise deal with Nexus Logistics implies 70% coverage of the Midwest supply chain. Game over for the competition. Read it and weep. Sis. I clicked the link. The draft was filled with the kind of hyperbolic corporate speak that makes my teeth ache. It used words like synergy, paradigm shift, and frictionless liquidity. It claimed that Vantigrid was finalizing a partnership that would validate their entire business model. 2 hours later, my mother called. She did not say hello. She just launched into a breathless recounting of the news, as if she were a town crier announcing a royal wedding. "Did you hear?" she asked. "Gavin called us from the car. He is signing the biggest contract in the history of the company. He said once the ink is dry, the valuation is going to double. Alice, your father is already looking at vacation homes in Cabo for the whole family to celebrate." "That sounds significant," I said, putting my phone on speaker so I could continue typing a regression analysis on municipal bond yields. "Did he mention the payment terms?" "The what?" "The payment terms. Mom, a contract is great, but if the payment is net 90 or net 120, it doesn't solve his immediate cash flow problem. In fact, servicing a huge contract without upfront cash can actually kill a company faster than having no business at all." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint hum of her expensive kitchen appliances. "You always do this," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You always find the dark cloud. Why can't you just say congratulations?" I will say congratulations when the cash is in the bank, I said. I am just being practical. Well, your brother is practical too. He is a CEO. He knows what he is doing. He said the investors are lining up around the block to get into this round because of this deal. I hung up 10 minutes later, feeling that familiar mixture of exhaustion and pity. The problem with my family was not that they were unintelligent. It was that they were optimists in a game that required paranoia. They believed the press release. I looked at the balance sheet. The reality of the market that week was not champagne bottles. It was a bloodbath. The Federal Reserve had announced another rate hike on Wednesday. The cost of borrowing money ticked up again. For a profitable company, this was an annoyance. For a pre-profit, cash-burning startup like Vantigrid, it was a tightening noose. Venture capital funds, which had been spraying money like fire hoses only a year ago, were suddenly turning off the taps. They were ghosting founders. They were pulling term sheets for compliance reasons that were really just polite ways of saying we don't trust you to survive the winter. I sat in my office at Northline Strategies, my spare bedroom, and pulled up the industry chatter. The 3 term sheets Gavin had bragged about at Sunday dinner were likely verbal expressions of interest, not binding contracts. In the venture world, a verbal yes is worth exactly $0. I watched the deal flow data. 2 of the firms Gavin had hinted were interested in him had just laid off 10% of their own staff. They weren't writing checks. They were hoarding cash. Then came the notification from my independent analysis channel. I had commissioned a forensic look at Vantigrid's digital footprint through a third-party audit firm that Northline used for due diligence. The report was titled, Traffic and Engagement Anomalies. The summary was brutal. Web traffic to Vantigrid's client portal has stagnated for 3 consecutive months. User session times are down 40%. New account creations are up, but active daily users are down. It meant they were signing people up, probably with the free promotions I had noticed earlier, but nobody was actually using the product. The churn rate wasn't 5% like Gavin claimed. It was likely closer to 15 or 20%. That evening, my encrypted messaging app pinged. It was a contact I had cultivated months ago, a mid-level product manager who had left Vantigrid quietly in September. I had never told him who I was, only that I was an industry analyst looking for background trends. The message was short. The retention numbers in the board deck are dressed up. We were told to count anyone who logged in once in 90 days as active. If we use the standard 30-day metric, the user base is hollow. No one dares tell the CEO. He shoots the messenger. I stared at the screen. Dressed up retention. This was fraud adjacent. It wasn't stealing money from the till, but it was lying to future investors about the health of the patient. If Gavin signed a deal based on these numbers, and the investors found out later, they wouldn't just fire him, they would sue him into oblivion. My phone rang again. It was Gavin. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. I picked up. Alice, he shouted. The background noise sounded like a bar or a very loud restaurant. I just wanted to check in on my favorite actuary. How is the exciting world of what is it policy research? It is fine, Gavin, I said. Quiet? Solvents. Solvent. Good one. Listen, I wanted to tell you, you don't need to worry about that burn rate stuff you were whining about at dinner. We are crushing it. I have got a line of credit opening up next week that is going to make your head spin. A line of credit, I asked. Secured against what your receivables? Secured against our brilliance, Alice. Secured against the future. He laughed. But the laugh sounded thin. It lacked the resonant baritone of genuine confidence. It sounded like a man laughing in a graveyard to prove he wasn't scared of ghosts. You really need to get out more. You are stuck in the weeds. I am flying at 30,000 feet. The air is thin up there, I said. Hypoxia sets in fast if the cabin depressurizes. Always a ray of sunshine. Look, I have to go. I have a meeting with a potential CFO who actually understands growth. Unlike some people, just wanted to say hello. Keep writing your little reports that no one reads. The line went dead. He was drunk. Not slurring drunk, but manic drunk. The kind of intoxication that comes from terror masked as euphoria. I turned back to my monitors. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started inputting the variables. Current cash position estimated at less than $500,000 based on the timeline of his last round. Monthly burn $700,000. Minimum. Outstanding payables likely stacking up. The big contract. Likely net 60 payment terms, meaning no cash for 2 months even if he signed it today. The investors stalling. I ran the simulation. The cell at the bottom of the sheet turned bright red. 6 weeks. Maybe 8 weeks if he stopped paying the rent on the office and delayed payroll by a few days. But realistically, 6 weeks. Vantigrid was a dead man walking. The brain just hadn't told the legs to stop moving yet. The following Sunday, I flew back to Scottsdale. I didn't have to, but I wanted to see the data points in person. I needed to calibrate my model against the physical reality of Gavin Ross. The dinner table was set with the same impeccable precision. The roast chicken was golden brown, the wine was expensive, but the air in the room had changed density. It felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a tornado touches down. Gavin was there, but the manic energy from the phone call was gone. He was wearing a t-shirt that looked slightly wrinkled, as if he had pulled it out of a laundry pile. He sat hunched over his plate, moving a potato around with his fork. "So," my father said, slicing into a chicken breast, "how is the Nexus deal coming along? Did we get the signature?" Gavin didn't look up. He kept staring at the potato. "It is illegal," he mumbled. "Lawyers. You know how they are. They redline everything. It slows down the process." "Of course," my father said, nodding sagely. "Due diligence. It is a good sign. It means they are serious." "And the funding?" my mother asked. "The term sheets." Gavin took a quick, nervous sip of his water. He didn't reach for the wine. "We are negotiating the valuation. I told them I wouldn't take a down round. I am holding the line for the $40 million. They are trying to lowball me because of the interest rates." "Stick to your guns," my father said. "Don't let them bully you." I watched Gavin's hand. It was trembling slightly, just a micro-tremor, barely visible unless you were looking for it. But I was looking for it. "The market is tough right now." "Gavin," I said quietly, "a down round is better than a no round. If you run out of runway—" "I am not running out of runway," Gavin snapped. His head jerked up, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. They were rimmed with red. There were dark circles under them that no amount of expensive moisturizer could hide. "Why are you always counting the days? Alice, why can't you just support me?" "I am supporting you," I said. "I am telling you the truth." "I don't need your truth," he spat. "I need time, that is all. Just a few more weeks." He looked at my father, then quickly looked away. It was a fleeting moment, a fraction of a second, but it was devastating. Gavin Ross, the golden boy, the family hero, couldn't hold his father's gaze. He was hiding something. My father paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He sensed it too. The bluster was gone. The bravado was cracked. "Is everything all right, son?" Dad asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. "It is fine," Gavin said, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "It is just stressful. Startup life, high pressure, you know." "Of course," my mother said quickly, jumping in to patch the leak in the hull. "You are working too hard. Honey, you need a break. Once this money comes in, you should take a week off. Go to Hawaii. Recharge." "Yeah," Gavin whispered. "Once the money comes in." He went back to pushing his food around. He didn't eat another bite. I sat there, cutting my chicken into perfect, bite-sized squares. I chewed slowly. I observed. The dynamic had shifted. For years, this table had been a stage where Gavin performed his success. Now, it was a bunker. The shells were falling outside, getting closer and closer, and the general was realizing he had no ammunition left. The timeline in my head accelerated. It wasn't 6 weeks anymore. Seeing the way he flinched when his phone vibrated on the table, seeing the way he avoided the topic of payroll, it was closer. The money hadn't just slowed down, it had stopped. The 3 term sheets were ghosts. The big contract was stuck in a legal purgatory he couldn't afford to wait for, and the retention numbers were a ticking time bomb that prevented him from showing his books to anyone with a functioning calculator. My father started talking about the weather, about the golf course, about anything to fill the vacuum of silence that Gavin had left. My mother laughed too loudly at his jokes. They were building a wall of noise to keep the reality out. But I sat in the silence beneath the noise. I knew what was coming. The crash wouldn't be a fiery explosion. It wouldn't be a dramatic scene in a movie. It would be a phone call on a Tuesday morning. It would be a server shut-off notice. It would be a payroll provider rejecting a batch transfer because of insufficient funds. It was the silence of a bank account hitting zero, and it was deafening. The call from Mara came on a Thursday morning, cutting through the silence of my home office like a siren. It was not her usual check-in time. Mara was a creature of habit who believed that chaos was a sign of poor planning. So an unscheduled call meant that the market had either crashed or an opportunity had just presented itself on a silver platter. "I have a distressed asset on the radar," Mara said, skipping the pleasantries. "It just hit the private wire for boutique firms. The lead investor pulled out of a Series B round 48 hours before closing. The company is gasping for air." "Sector?" I asked, keeping my eyes on my monitors. "Fintech, B2B payment infrastructure, based in Scottsdale and Austin." I stopped typing. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keys of my keyboard. I took a slow breath, centering myself. I had expected this, but I had not expected it this fast. My model had predicted 6 weeks. It had been less than 3. "Name?" I asked, though I already knew. "Vantigrid," Mara said. "The broker is shopping it quietly, but the smell of desperation is already leaking out. They are asking for a bridge round of $2 million to keep the lights on." The broker was blunt. He said they have a runway of approximately 45 days before they miss payroll. "Send me the data room access," I said. "Alice," Mara said, her voice dropping into that cautionary tone she used when she thought I was trading on emotion rather than logic. I looked at the preliminary sheet. It is a mess. The burn rate is catastrophic. The cap table is complicated. This is not a Northline play. We buy stability. We do not buy falling knives. "Send it, Mara. I want to see the knife before I decide if I'm going to catch it." 5 minutes later, the secure link arrived. I spent the next 6 hours dissecting the corpse of my brother's ambition. The financial statements were exactly what I had feared, yet fascinated me in their textbook predictability. Vantigrid was a classic case of a company that had confused raising money with making money. The revenue growth was there, optically. The top-line numbers looked impressive, showing a 20% month-over-month increase. But when I drilled down into the cost of revenue, the illusion shattered. They were spending $3 in marketing and sales to acquire $1 of revenue. I looked at the operating expenses. It was a catalog of ego. There was a lease for a Class A office space in downtown Austin that cost $40,000 a month. The build-out costs included soundproof pods, a meditation room, and a fully stocked bar. There were travel expenses for executive retreats in Aspen and Miami. There were retainer fees for a PR agency in New York that cost $15,000 a month for a company that hadn't shipped a major product update in 2 quarters. But then, I looked deeper. I pushed past the bloated fat of the administration and looked at the muscle of the engineering team. The core technology was actually brilliant. The transaction processing speed was milliseconds faster than the industry standard. The API documentation was clean. The engineers, the ones who hadn't left yet, were building something real. They had a proprietary algorithm for fraud detection that was better than anything currently on the market. The problem wasn't the car. The problem was the driver. Gavin was driving a Formula One car like it was a monster truck, smashing it into walls just to hear the crowd cheer. I called Mara back in the late afternoon. "We are going to make an offer," I said. "You are joking," Mara replied instantly. "Alice, the debt-to-equity ratio is terrifying, and the CEO as well. You know the CEO better than I do. He is volatile. He is a liability. The CEO is the problem. Yes, but the product is the solution," I said. leaning back in my chair. The market valuation for this technology, if stripped of the bloat, is easily 5 times what they are asking for in this bridge round. We are not buying the company as it is. We are buying the potential of what it should be. It is too risky, Mara insisted. If he defaults, we are left holding a bag of bad leases and angry employees. Risk is what we buy when it is cheap. Mara, I said, right now, Vantigrid is on the clearance rack, and it is on the clearance rack because the management is incompetent. Not because the market isn't there. If we control the management, we control the risk. Control the current board is stacked with his friends. Not after this round, I said. We are going to structure this as a lifeline with handcuffs. I want you to draft a term sheet. I want full ratchets. I want a liquidation preference of 2 times. I want a senior secured debt structure convertible to equity at a 20% discount to the next round. I paused, staring at the photo of my brother on his company website. He looked so confident, chin up, staring into a bright future that didn't exist. And, Mara, I added, my voice turning to steel, I want a board seat with veto power over any expenditure exceeding $10,000. I want a forensic audit clause. And I want a stipulation that the lead investor appoints a chief restructuring officer who reports directly to the board, bypassing the CEO. He will never sign that, Mara said. It is a surrender document. He has 45 days of cash left, I said. He doesn't have a choice. He can sign, or he can explain to Dad why the family name is going to be splashed across the business section of the Arizona Republic under the headline, Bankruptcy. Send the term sheet on Friday morning. Tell them the offer expires at 5 o'clock on Monday. Take it or leave it. And the name? Mara asked. Do we disclose? Absolutely not. The entity is Northline Strategies. You are the signatory. My name appears nowhere. If he sees Alice Ross on that paper, he will burn the company to the ground out of spite before he lets me save him. We stay dark until the ink is dry. Friday arrived. I worked from home, watching the email logs. At 9 o'clock Central Time, Mara sent the term sheet to Vantigrid's legal counsel and the broker. The subject line was simple: binding term sheet, bridge financing proposal, Northline Strategies. I imagined the scene in the Vantigrid office. The lawyers would read it first. They would wince at the terms. They would see the aggression in the clauses. They would see the 2 times liquidation preference, which meant that if the company was sold, Northline got double its money back before the founders saw a single cent. It was brutal. It was predatory. But it was the only water in the desert. The weekend passed in a strange limbo. I went grocery shopping. I cleaned my apartment. I did laundry. Normal, boring tasks for a normal, boring woman. Meanwhile, in Scottsdale and Austin, I knew the panic was setting in. I was not doing this for revenge. That was what I kept telling myself. If I wanted revenge, I would let him fail. I would let him crash and burn, and then I would buy the assets from the bankruptcy court for pennies. That would be the maximum financial return. But I didn't want the company to die. I didn't want the engineers, people with families and mortgages, to lose their jobs because my brother needed to feel important. I had already sketched out a restructuring plan. I would cut the marketing budget to 0. I would sublease the fancy office. I would cancel the PR retainers, but I would keep the product team. I would protect the core. I would make the company profitable, even if I had to drag it there kicking and screaming. Sunday night came. The deadline was less than 24 hours away. My phone rang. It was Gavin. I looked at the screen. I felt a spike of adrenaline, a physical reaction to the deception I was maintaining. I cleared my throat and answered. "Hey, Gavin." "Hey, sis," he said. He sounded exhausted, his voice raspy, as if he had been smoking a pack a day. "Just calling to check in. Sunday tradition." "Everything okay?" I asked. "You sound tired." "Tired? No, just grinding. You know how it is, the hustle." He let out a dry, forced laugh. "Actually, you don't know how it is. You are lucky. Alice, you have your 9 to 5. You clock out. You go home. You watch TV. You don't have the weight of the world on your shoulders. I suppose not, I said. We are closing a big round tomorrow, he lied. The lie was so blatant, so desperate, it almost made me sad. Just dotting the I's and crossing the T's? It is going to be huge, but the lawyers are being a pain. They always complicate simple deals. Is it the deal you wanted? I asked, probing gently. It is a strategic partnership, he said, dancing around the truth. New players, deep pockets, but they are demanding. They want a lot of control. It is annoying, really, dealing with people who don't understand the vision. They just look at spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are important. Gavin. Yeah. There you go again. The accountant speaks. He sighed, a heavy, shuddering sound. You know, sometimes I wish I could be like you, just content with being small. It must be peaceful, not having to fight for your legacy every single day. Small is sustainable, I said. Small is boring, he corrected. But look, I can't talk long. I have to review some documents. I just wanted to say, well, Dad was asking about you. He wanted to make sure you weren't struggling with rent or anything. I am fine. Gavin, really. Good. Because, once this deal closes tomorrow, I am going to be pretty tied up. I might not be able to help out for a while if you get into a jam. So, just manage your money. Okay, don't buy any more impulsive things. I looked around my living room, at my 5-year-old television, at my secondhand sofa, at the laptop on my desk that controlled a portfolio larger than his company's entire lifetime revenue. I will be careful, I said. All right, I gotta go. The sharks are circling, and I have to go show them who is the alpha. Good luck, Gavin, I said. Read the fine print? I always do, he said dismissively. Later, amateur. He hung up. I put the phone down on the table. The room was silent. He was standing on a bridge that was crumbling under his feet. He was looking down at the abyss, terrified, his heart pounding in his chest. And yet, even as he stared death in the face, he couldn't help but turn around and sneer at the person standing on the solid ground behind him. He had no idea that the amateur he mocked was holding the rope. He had no idea that the sharks he thought he was fighting were actually me. I opened my laptop and sent a message to Mara. Prepare the final execution copy. He will sign tomorrow morning. He has no other place to go. I closed the laptop. The game was over. He just didn't know he had lost yet. Tomorrow, the rescue would begin, and with it, the hardest lesson of Gavin Ross's life. The notification arrived on my secure server at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday. It was a digital receipt from DocuSign, followed 60 seconds later by a confirmation from the wire transfer protocol. Vantigrid had signed. They had not negotiated. They had not pushed back on the liquidation preference or the aggressive board control clauses. They had not even asked for a 24-hour extension to review the fine print with outside counsel. They had simply capitulated. It was the signature of a drowning man grabbing a rope without checking to see if it was made of barbed wire. I sat in my home office in Milwaukee, staring at the screen. $2 million of my capital was currently moving through the SWIFT system, traveling from my silent, boring accounts into the chaotic furnace of my brother's company. It was done. The transaction was irrevocable. Now that the money had cleared, the data wall came down. As the new controlling shareholder hidden behind the corporate veil of Northline Strategies, I was legally entitled to full administrative access to their internal systems. I didn't wait. I didn't celebrate. I logged in. I started with the raw CRM data. Bypassing the pretty dashboards Gavin used for board presentations, I went straight to the SQL database where the actual customer behavior was logged. It took me less than an hour to realize that Gavin's optimism was actually something much darker. At Sunday dinner, Gavin had spoken about revenue growth and record bookings. Technically, he wasn't lying, but he was doing something that makes auditors wake up in a cold sweat. He was recognizing revenue the moment a contract was signed, even if the service hadn't been delivered and the invoice hadn't been paid. I found a contract for a mid-sized logistics firm in Ohio. It was valued at $50,000. Gavin had booked the full $50,000 in October, but when I read the contract terms attached to the file, I saw a 60-day opt-out clause. The client had the right to cancel within 2 months for a full refund if the software didn't meet specific benchmarks. That wasn't revenue, that was a bet, and he was counting it as cash in the bank to secure loans. Then I looked at the retention numbers. The churn rate wasn't 5%, it was 22%. To hide this, the product team, likely under direct orders, had changed the definition of an active user. Previously, an active user was someone who processed a transaction once a week. Now, it was someone who simply opened the app once in 90 days. They were counting ghosts as customers. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just incompetence anymore. This was the kind of financial engineering that gets people subpoenaed. If I hadn't stepped in, if he had managed to trick a traditional venture capital fund into this round, the due diligence process would have uncovered this in weeks. They would have fired him for cause. They might have sued him for fraud. I was not just saving the company from bankruptcy. I was saving my brother from a legal nightmare he was too arrogant to see coming. I picked up my phone and called Mara. "Schedule the board meeting," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the sisterly warmth I usually faked. "Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, Austin headquarters." "The CEO will want to prepare," Mara said. "He is asking for an agenda." "No agenda," I said. "Tell him the new investor representative is flying in to formalize the transition and discuss strategic realignment. Tell him attendance is mandatory for the CEO and the CFO." "Understood," Mara said. "He thinks he is meeting me. Let him think that." That evening, my phone buzzed with a family group video call. I accepted the request, propping the phone up against a stack of actuarial journals. Gavin's face filled the screen. He was back in his high-back leather chair. The panic of the weekend entirely erased. His skin looked flushed with victory. He was holding a glass of scotch, and behind him, I could see the lights of the Austin skyline. "We did it," Gavin announced, raising the glass to the camera. "We closed the round. Money is in the bank." My mother clapped her hands together, her face glowing on the bottom quadrant of the screen. "Oh, Gavin, I knew it. I told your father." I said, "Gavin always lands on his feet. Didn't I say that? Robert?" "You did," my father agreed. He looked relieved, the tension lines around his eyes smoothing out. "Proud of you, son. That is resilience. Who came through? Was it the group from Silicon Valley?" "Even better," Gavin said, leaning back and swirling his drink. "It is a boutique firm called Northline Strategies, private equity, very exclusive. They keep a low profile, but they have deep pockets." "And the terms?" my father asked, ever the businessman. "Did they take a big chunk?" Gavin waved his hand dismissively. "Standard stuff. They get a board seat, obviously. But here's the best part, they are hands-off. They believe in the founder-led vision. They basically gave me the money and said, 'Go do what you do best. Gavin, build the empire.' They know better than to get in the way of the talent." I sat in my Milwaukee apartment, listening to him rewrite reality in real time, hands off. He hadn't even read the document, or if he had, he didn't understand what he had signed. The term sheet gave Northline the power to fire the CEO with a simple majority vote. It gave Northline veto power over any check larger than $5,000. It was the opposite of hands-off. It was a straitjacket. "That is wonderful, Gavin," I said. I kept my face neutral. "It sounds like you really charmed them." "Well, you know," Gavin said, winking at the camera. "The numbers speak for themselves. Alice, when you build a rocket ship, people want a seat. Even the shy money comes out of the woodwork." "So, what is the plan now?" I asked. "Expansion," he said. "We are going to double the sales team by next month. I am looking at opening a satellite office in London. Northline is fully on board with the aggressive growth strategy." He was lying to them. He was lying to himself, and in less than 48 hours, he was going to hit a wall at 100 miles an hour. "Just be careful," my mother said. "Don't work too hard. I am the CEO. Mom, Hard work is the job description. Anyway, I have to run. I have a dinner with the VP of Sales to celebrate. Just wanted to share the good news. Love you guys. Love you, my parents chorused. Bye, Gavin, I said. The screen went black. I packed my bag. I didn't pack the cardigans or the sensible slacks I usually wore to family gatherings. I went to the back of my closet, past the winter coats, to a garment bag I hadn't unzipped in 2 years. Inside was a charcoal gray Italian wool suit, tailored to fit me like a second skin. It was sharp, severe, and expensive. I packed a pair of black stiletto heels, not the sensible flats I wore to the institute. I packed my leather portfolio. I flew to Austin on Tuesday morning. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't rent a car. I took a rideshare to a nondescript business hotel 3 blocks from the Vantagrid office. It wasn't the W or the Four Seasons where Gavin stayed when he felt flush. It was a place for people who did work, not people who performed wealth. I spent Tuesday night in the hotel room reviewing every single anomaly in the data. I memorized the fraudulent retention stats. I memorized the inflated customer acquisition costs. I built a mental map of exactly where the money was bleeding out. By Wednesday morning, I was no longer Alice the sister. I was Alice the operator of Northline Strategies. I dressed slowly. The suit was armor. When I put it on, my posture changed. I stood taller. The heels clicked sharply against the tile floor of the hotel bathroom. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun, no loose strands, no softness. I applied makeup that was precise and professional, nothing like the barely there look I wore at home. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the financial amateur. She was the person who owned the debt. At 9:45 in the morning, I walked into the lobby of the building that housed Vantagrid. It was a glass and steel monolith in downtown Austin. The lobby smelled of expensive coffee and ambition. I took the elevator to the 22nd floor. The Vantagrid reception area was exactly as I had imagined: lush plants, an open espresso bar, a neon sign on the wall that said, "Disrupt everything." Young employees in hoodies and headphones drifted through the space, looking busy, but not necessarily productive. The receptionist, a young woman with bright blue hair, looked up from her phone. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I am here for the 10 o'clock board meeting," I said. My voice was cool, projecting to the back of the room. She frowned, checking her iPad. "I don't show any external guests. Is this with Gavin?" "It is with the board of directors," I said. "My name is on the list. Northline." She tapped the screen, looking confused. "Oh, I see a Ms. Keene from Northline Strategies." "I am representing Northline," I said. I didn't offer my name. I simply held her gaze until she felt the weight of the authority I was projecting. "Okay," she stammered. "Let me just— the conference room is the big glass one at the end of the hall. The war room. You can head back." "Thank you." I walked down the hallway. The office was an open-plan layout, designed to look chaotic and energetic. I saw the sales team high-fiving. I saw the ping-pong table. I saw the money burning. The war room was at the corner of the building, offering a panoramic view of the Colorado River. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. I could see inside before I opened the door. Gavin was there. He was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, his feet propped up on an empty chair. He was wearing a casual blazer over a t-shirt, looking every bit the relaxed, conquering hero. Across from him sat the CFO, a man named Miller who looked tired and nervous, and the corporate secretary. Gavin was laughing. He was gesturing with a pen, telling some story, probably about how he had outsmarted the market. I stopped at the door. I took one final breath. This was the point of no return. Once I opened this door, the dynamic of our lives would change forever. There would be no going back to the quiet sister and the loud brother. The hierarchy was about to be inverted. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The sound of my heels on the polished concrete floor was sharp click, click, click. Gavin didn't look up immediately. He was mid-sentence. So I told them, "If you want the equity, you play by my rules." And they folded. Total fold. I walked to the opposite end of the table. directly facing him, and placed my leather portfolio on the surface. The sound of the leather hitting the wood was a dull thud that cut through his voice. Gavin stopped. He turned his head. For a moment, his brain couldn't process the visual information. He saw a woman in a power suit. He saw a stranger. And then, the features resolved. His smile froze. It didn't fade slowly. It just stopped, trapped in a grotesque rictus of confusion. "Alice?" he asked. The word came out as a squeak. He took his feet off the chair and sat up, blinking. He looked at the door, expecting someone else to walk in behind me. Maybe the real investor. Then he looked back at me. "Alice, what are you doing here?" he asked, a nervous chuckle bubbling up. "Did you come to surprise me?" "I am in a meeting, Al. A really important board meeting. You can't just walk in here." The CFO, Miller, looked at me, then at Gavin, confused. "Gavin, is this—" "My sister?" Gavin said, waving a hand frantically. "She visits sometimes. Alice, seriously, you have to wait in the lobby. I have the investors from Northline coming in any second. It is super confidential." I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I stood at the head of the table, commanding the space with a silence that I had learned from years of trading in rooms where noise was a liability. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a single document. It was the executed term sheet, signed yesterday. I slid it down the long mahogany table. It hissed across the varnish and came to a stop directly in front of Gavin. "I know," I said. My voice was steady, resonant, and completely unrecognizable to the brother who thought I was a mouse. "Alice, I don't have time for games," Gavin snapped, his face reddening. "Get out, now." "Sit down, Gavin," I said. The command was so absolute, so filled with the weight of ownership, that the CFO actually sat up straighter. Gavin stood up, furious. "Excuse me, you don't tell me to sit down in my own company? I am the CEO. Security?" He reached for the phone on the console. "I wouldn't do that," I said, "unless you want security to escort you out." Gavin froze, his hand hovering over the phone. He looked at the document in front of him. He looked at the signature page. He looked at the entity name, Northline Strategies. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the suit. He saw the cold calculation in my eyes. He saw the amateur dissolving into something terrifyingly professional. "I am not here to visit, Gavin," I said. "I am not here as your sister." I walked to the chair at the head of the table, the investor's seat, and pulled it out. "I am here for the meeting," I said, sitting down and opening my file. "I am Northline." The silence in the war room was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library. It was the vacuum of space immediately after an airlock has been blown open. Miller, the CFO, was the first to move. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the document I had slid across the table. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked at the signature block on the final page, then flipped to the Exhibit A attached to the back. It was a certificate of incumbency, a legal document that explicitly listed the officers authorized to act on behalf of Northline Strategies. There was only one name listed. Miller looked up at me. His face had drained of color, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been calculating the trajectory of a missile that was aimed at his own house. "It is her," Miller whispered. The sound was barely audible. "Northline Strategies, the managing director. It is Alice Ross." Gavin let out a laugh. It was a sharp, jagged sound, like glass breaking. "Don't be ridiculous, Miller. It is a coincidence. It is a common name. Alice is a researcher in Milwaukee. She makes $60,000 a year. She drives a Honda." He turned to me, his eyes wide and frantic, begging me to break the character he thought I was playing. "Alice, tell him this is some kind of joke. Did Dad put you up to this? Is this a lesson on humility or something?" "It is not a lesson, Gavin," I said. "It is an acquisition of control." "You don't have this kind of money," Gavin shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sudden violence of the motion made the corporate secretary jump. $2 million? You count coupons. You live in a shoebox. Where would you get $2 million? I earned it, I said calmly. While you were buying press releases, I was building a quantitative trading system. While you were networking at cocktail parties, I was leveraging volatility indices. Bullshit, he spat. You are lying. Miller, I said, ignoring my brother and shifting my gaze to the CFO. Check the wire transfer confirmation number. Look at the originating bank. It is a private client account at Northern Trust. Who is the signatory on the account? Miller tapped furiously on his laptop. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room. He pulled up the banking portal. He stared at the screen for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Then he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. It is Alice Ross, Miller said. The funds are cleared. The term sheet is executed. Northline owns the preferred shares. They control the board. Gavin slumped back in his chair as if his strings had been cut. He looked from Miller to me, his mouth opening and closing. The reality was crashing down on him, but his ego was fighting it every inch of the way. You. Gavin pointed a shaking finger at me. You set me up. You waited. You watched me struggle. And you waited until I was on the edge of the cliff. I waited until the price was rational, I corrected him. You did this to humiliate me, he said, his voice rising again, trembling with a mix of rage and tears. This isn't business. This is revenge. You are jealous because I am the star, because Dad looks at me and sees potential, and he looks at you and sees nothing, so you bought my company to wreck it. Is that it? I leaned forward, clasping my hands on top of the leather portfolio. Gavin, look at the balance sheet, I said coldly. Your company isn't a star. It is a corpse. You have 45 days of cash left. Your burn rate is out of control. Your retention numbers are fraudulent. I didn't buy Vantigrid to wreck it. I bought it because it was already wrecked, and I am the only one who knows how to fix the engine before it hits the ground. My numbers are solid, Gavin insisted. We have the Nexus deal. The Nexus deal has a 60-day opt-out clause, I said. And you booked the revenue in October. That is accounting fraud. Gavin, if I hadn't stepped in, you wouldn't just be broke. You would be in front of an SEC tribunal. Gavin went pale. He looked at Miller. You told her? I didn't tell her anything, Miller protested. She has admin access. It was in the term sheet. She can see everything. Enough, I said. I opened my portfolio and took out a second document. It was a thick, bound presentation titled Strategic Realignment and Restructuring Plan. We are not here to discuss your feelings. We are here to stop the bleeding. This is the new operating plan. It goes into effect immediately. I slid copies to Miller and the secretary. I didn't slide one to Gavin. He could read the one on the screen if he wanted to. Page 1, I said, my voice taking on the cadence of a boardroom executioner. The Austin office lease. It is $40,000 a month for a space that is 30% occupied. We are breaking the lease. We are moving the team to a co-working space in the tech district. Estimated savings $480,000 annually. You can't do that, Gavin said. The office is our image. Clients come there. It shows we are a major player. Clients don't care about your office, Gavin. They care if your API works. Page 2. The marketing budget. You are spending $15,000 a month on a PR firm in New York. Cancelled. You are spending $20,000 a month on brand awareness ads that have zero conversion tracking. Cancelled. You are killing our visibility, Gavin argued. We need to be seen. You need to be solvent, I countered. Page 3, personnel. The room went deadly quiet. The sales team is bloated, I said. We have 12 account executives. 8 of them have not closed a deal in 6 months. They are let go today. The chief strategy officer, your college roommate, I believe is being paid $200,000 a year to ideate. He is terminated effective immediately. You are firing my friends, Gavin whispered. I am firing liabilities, I said. But the engineering team stays. The product team stays. Customer support stays. We are cutting the fat. Gavin, not the muscle. We are going back to being a technology company, not a lifestyle brand. Miller was flipping through the pages, nodding. He was reading the math, and for the first time in months, he looked like he was seeing a path to survival. "This actually works," Miller murmured. "If we execute these cuts, the runway extends to 14 months. We become cash flow positive by Q3 next year. Don't side with her," Gavin snapped at Miller. "She doesn't understand our culture. Vantigrid isn't just about the bottom line. It is about the vibe. It is about the energy. If you take away the office, the perks, the retreats, you kill the soul of the company." I looked at my brother. He really believed it. He believed that the soul of a business was found in a ping-pong table and a fully stocked bar, not in the value it provided to its customers. "Vibe doesn't pay payroll, Gavin," I said. "Culture doesn't pay the server bills. And right now, your soul is bouncing checks. Real culture is discipline. Real culture is building something that doesn't collapse the moment the venture capital market sneezes. I am the founder." Gavin stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I have the super voting shares. You can't force this on me. I am the chairman of the board." "Sit down," I said again. "No, I will veto this. I will read the term sheet, Gavin." I interrupted him, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a scalpel. Section 4, paragraph B. In the event of financial distress, defined as less than 3 months of operating capital, the Series B lead investor, that is Northline, assumes voting control on all budgetary and strategic matters until the company achieves 2 consecutive quarters of profitability. Gavin stopped. He looked down at the document in front of him, the one he had signed yesterday without reading because he was too busy celebrating his own genius. "You signed away your kingdom to save your crown. Gavin," I said. "You just didn't realize it." I turned to the corporate secretary. "I call for a vote on the restructuring plan as presented by Northline Strategies. Miller." Miller looked at Gavin. Then he looked at the spreadsheet on page 4 of my plan. He looked at the survival of the company versus the ego of his friend. It wasn't even a choice. "I vote yes," Miller said quietly. "Northline votes yes," I said. "The motion carries. The restructuring begins today." Gavin stood there, isolated at the head of the table. He looked small. The expansive glass windows behind him, which usually framed him like a master of the universe, now just made him look like a tiny figure against a vast, indifferent sky. He slumped back into his chair. He didn't look at me. He looked at his hands. "I am the CEO," he muttered. "I am supposed to be the visionary." "You can still be the visionary," I said, closing my portfolio. "But I am the operator now. You can go on podcasts. You can shake hands. You can talk about the future, but you do not sign checks. You do not hire, and you do not fire. You are a figurehead until you prove you can be a leader." I stood up. The meeting was over. I had done what I came to do. I walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, Gavin spoke. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual bluster. "You really think you can do this?" he asked. "You think you can just walk in here from your little research job and run a tech company? You are an amateur, Alice. You said it yourself." I stopped. I didn't turn around. I let the words hang in the air for a second. "You told the family to leave finance to the experts," I said. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch his reflection in the glass wall. "So I did," I said. "I left it to me." I walked out of the war room. The sound of my heels clicking down the hallway was the only sound in the entire office. The receptionist looked up as I passed, her eyes wide. She didn't know exactly what had happened in that room, but she knew the energy had shifted. The king was dead. Long live the queen. I walked out into the Texas heat. It was bright and blinding. I checked my phone. I had 3 emails from Miller already, asking for authorization to begin the lease termination process. I typed a single reply, proceed. Then I called a rideshare. I wasn't going to the Ritz. I was going back to my budget hotel to work, because unlike my brother, I knew that the real work wasn't in the victory lap. The real work was just beginning. The first week of my tenure as the controlling operator of Vantigrid was not a victory lap. It was a demolition project performed with a scalpel. The office in Austin, which had previously vibrated with the artificial energy of a frat house flush with cash, was now silent. I had established a temporary command center in a conference room next to the CFO's office. The glass walls were covered in sticky notes, mapping out the flow of capital where it came from, and more importantly, where it was leaking out. My first order of business was the vanity audit. I pulled every vendor contract from the last 12 months and sorted them into two piles: essential for revenue and essential for Gavin's ego. The ego pile was staggering. There was a contract with a brand activation agency based in Los Angeles that charged $12,000 a month to manage the company's Instagram account. Vantigrid was a B2B payment processor for logistics firms. Trucking companies do not choose their payment vendors based on Instagram aesthetic. I canceled it on Tuesday morning. There was a subscription for a high-end snack delivery service that provided organic, gluten-free jerky and cold brew coffee kegs. The cost was $4,000 a month. I canceled it before lunch. Then came the harder part: the people. We had to reduce the headcount by 30% to align the burn rate with reality. Gavin, who had spent the last 2 days hiding in his office with the blinds drawn, finally emerged when he saw the list of names. "You can't fire the VP of brand," Gavin argued. Standing in the doorway of my war room, he looked disheveled, his usual polish chipping away. "He is a visionary. He built our entire voice. He sends newsletters that have a 3% open rate," I said, not looking up from a severance agreement draft. "And he costs us $180,000 a year. We are keeping the customer success managers. We are keeping the engineers. But we are not keeping a poet laureate for a fintech company." "You are enjoying this," Gavin said bitterly. "You like swinging the axe?" I took off my reading glasses and looked at him. "No, Gavin, I hate this. These are real people with families. That is why we are doing it this way." I slid the severance plan across the table. 2 months of full pay, I said. 3 months of health insurance coverage. And we are paying for an outplacement service to help them find new jobs. Most startups in this position would just lock the doors on a Friday and let the checks bounce. We are not doing that. We are going to be smaller, but we are going to be decent. Gavin looked at the numbers. "That is expensive. If we just cut them with 2 weeks' pay, we save—" "We are not cutting them with 2 weeks' pay," I interrupted. "We are buying their silence and their goodwill. If you treat people like trash on the way out, they talk. And right now, we can't afford a reputation for cruelty. We are paying for dignity. Gavin, something you should understand." He signed the authorization, but he did it with a scowl, as if I were forcing him to drink poison. By Thursday, the layoffs were done. It was a brutal day. I sat in every meeting. I looked people in the eye. I didn't hide behind HR. I told them the truth: the company had overhired. The financials were being restructured, and this was necessary for the survival of the business. I didn't blame Gavin explicitly, but everyone in the room knew who had hired them and who was now saving the ship. But Gavin couldn't help himself. He couldn't accept the new reality of constraints. On Friday morning, my automated monitoring system flagged a series of transactions in the accounts payable queue. I had set a strict rule: any expense over $5,000 required my digital signature. At 10 o'clock, a request came in for $4,800. Vendor Apex Strategic Consulting. At 10:15, another request for $4,800. Vendor Apex Strategic Consulting. At 10:30, a third request. Same amount, same vendor. I clicked on the invoice details. They were for strategic advisory services. I walked down the hall to Gavin's office. I didn't knock. He was on the phone, laughing. When he saw me, he hung up quickly. "Who is Apex Strategic Consulting?" I asked. Gavin blinked. "Oh, just a vendor. Some data analysis stuff." "It is the PR firm in New York, isn't it?" I asked. "The one I ordered you to cancel 3 days ago." Gavin shifted in his chair. "They are on a retainer, Alice. We can't just cut them off. I negotiated a structured exit. I'm just paying out the final balance. You are structuring the payments to bypass my signature authority, I said. 3 invoices, all just under the $5,000 limit. That is called smurfing. Gavin, drug dealers do it to avoid banking alerts. CEOs do it when they are about to get fired for cause. I am the CEO, he shouted, the vein in his neck popping. I need discretion to manage my relationships. You have no discretion, I said. I am rejecting the payments, and I am emailing the firm to tell them their contract is void. If you try to circumvent the controls one more time just once, I will call a board meeting and remove you from the building. Do not test me. I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. And Gavin. The lease review is finished. I need the original copy of the office lease agreement, the one with the wet signatures. The digital copy in the data room is incomplete. Gavin went still. It was a subtle reaction, a freezing of his frame, like an animal hearing a twig snap in the woods. Why? He asked. His voice was too high. It is a standard commercial lease. The digital copy is fine. The legal team needs the addendums, I said. Where is it? I think it is in the safe at home, in Scottsdale. Why is the company lease in your personal safe in Scottsdale? I wanted to keep it safe. I will bring it next week. I looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. My instincts, honed by years of reading market bluffs, screamed at me. There was something in that lease he didn't want me to see. Never mind, I said. I will get it from the landlord directly. I walked back to my office and called the property management company that owned the building. I identified myself as the new controlling partner of Vantigrid. The property manager was all too happy to talk to someone who wasn't dodging his calls about the late rent. I need the full lease agreement emailed to me immediately, I said, including all guarantor documents. 10 minutes later, the PDF arrived in my inbox. I scrolled through the legalese: standard triple net lease, 5-year term, escalating rent. Then I reached the final page. Addendum, a personal guarantee. In commercial real estate, if a company doesn't have a strong credit history, the landlord requires a human being to personally guarantee the rent. If the company goes bust, that human being is liable for the entire remaining value of the lease. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It wasn't Gavin's. It was a shaky, familiar scrawl that I had seen on birthday cards and report cards my entire life. Robert Ross. I stopped breathing for a moment. The lease had 3 years remaining. At $40,000 a month, the total liability was nearly $1.5 million. If Vantigrid went under, which was a very real possibility before I stepped in, the landlord wouldn't just sue the company. They would sue my father. They would take his retirement accounts. They would put a lien on the house in Scottsdale. They would bankrupt my parents. Gavin hadn't just bet his own career. He had bet our parents' lives, and he hadn't told them. I felt a cold, white-hot rage that was entirely different from the professional annoyance I had felt earlier. This was personal. This was a violation of the fundamental code of family, even a dysfunctional one. I printed the page. I walked back to Gavin's office. I didn't yell. I closed the door and locked it. I slammed the paper down on his desk. When? I asked. Gavin looked at the signature. He collapsed. He didn't argue. He just put his head in his hands. 18 months ago, he whispered. When we moved in, the landlord wouldn't sign without a guarantor. I didn't have the assets. Dad offered. Dad offered, I asked. Or you asked him. Gavin didn't answer. That was answer enough. Does he know? I asked. Does he know that 2 weeks ago, you were 45 days away from him losing his house? I wasn't going to let that happen. Gavin looked up, tears streaming down his face. The Nexus deal was going to close. I was going to pay it off. I just needed time. You gambled with his life, Gavin, not yours, his. I looked at my brother, the golden boy, the success story, and I saw a terrified child who had dug a hole so deep he was willing to pull everyone else in with him rather than admit he was stuck. You are going to fix this, I said. No, I am going to fix this, because you can't be trusted to tie your own shoes right now. I went back to my office and called the landlord again. This is Alice Ross from Northline, I said. We are restructuring the lease. We want to downsize the space. We have a binding contract, the property manager said aggressively. And we have a guarantor. We aren't letting you off the hook. I am not asking to be let off the hook, I said. I am making you an offer. Northline Strategies will write you a check today for 6 months of rent, up front, in cash. In exchange, you release the personal guarantee of Robert Ross immediately and allow us to terminate the lease in 90 days with no penalty. I would have to run that by the owners. The manager stammered. Cash is king in a down market. A guaranteed 6 months of cash was worth more than chasing a lawsuit against a retiree. You have 1 hour, I said, or we file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy tomorrow, and you get in line with the other creditors. You will get 10 cents on the dollar in 3 years. Your choice. He called back in 20 minutes. They took the deal. I wired $240,000 of Northline's money to the landlord that afternoon. It was a massive hit to my liquidity, but it bought the one thing money usually can't buy: my father's safety. I didn't tell Dad. I didn't tell Mom. And I forbade Gavin from ever mentioning it. The shame was his punishment. But secrets in a company like Vantigrid are porous. The layoffs, the new austerity, the mysterious woman in the suit people were talking. By Saturday, the rumor had drifted from the Austin office to the broader tech community, and inevitably, back to Scottsdale. The new investor is family. The CEO has been sidelined. It is the sister. My phone rang on Saturday night. It was my mother. Alice, her voice was shaking. It wasn't the confident, socialite tone I was used to. It was small. Hi, Mom? Alice, I heard Mrs. Henderson at the club. Her son works in tech in Austin. He told her that he said Gavin is in trouble. He said Northline Strategies is you. I closed my eyes. I was sitting in my hotel room, eating a salad from a plastic container. It is complicated, Mom. Is it true? She asked. Did you take the company from him? I didn't take it, I said. I saved it. Gavin is still the CEO. But yes, Northline is me. But how? She asked, bewildered. How do you have that kind of money? You are a researcher. I have had a side business for a long time, I said. I just never talked about it. Gavin sounded so quiet when I called him, she said. He wouldn't tell me anything. He just said to ask you, Alice, please, tell me the truth. Is he okay? Is the family okay? I thought about the lease. I thought about the $1.5 million of debt I had just wiped off my father's name without them knowing. We are okay, Mom, I said. I am keeping it alive. I promise. You don't have to worry about the money. Just don't ask Gavin about it right now. His ego is bruised. You are a good sister, she whispered, sounding like she was trying to convince herself. You are helping him. I am doing what is necessary. Sunday dinner the next day was excruciating. I flew back to Phoenix for the afternoon, driving the rental car to the house. When I walked in, the air was thick enough to choke on. Gavin was there. He wasn't drinking scotch. He was drinking water. He looked thinner, his tan fading. When I entered the room, he didn't make a joke about my amateur status. He didn't look at me at all. He stared at the tablecloth. My father sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak with mechanical movements. He knew something had shifted. The power dynamic in the room had completely inverted, but he didn't understand the mechanics of it. He looked at Gavin, then at me, trying to reconcile the daughter he thought was useless with the woman who apparently owned his son's boss. So, Dad said, his voice forced. Alice, your mother tells me you have been active in the market. Just diversifying, Dad, I said, putting a napkin in my lap. And Gavin, Dad turned to him. Everything is stable at the company. Gavin looked up. His eyes met mine. He saw the person who held his leash. He saw the person who had quietly paid $250,000 to save their father from financial ruin, a secret I was keeping for him. Yes, Dad, Gavin said, his voice barely a whisper. Everything is stable. Alice is helping with the operations. She is very good with the details. Good, Dad said, nodding, though he looked terrified. That is good. Family helping family. That is what matters. We ate in silence. The clinking of silverware on china sounded like gunshots. Nobody brought up the Porsche in the driveway. Nobody brought up the valuation. The fantasy was dead. We were just sitting in the wreckage, eating roast beef. I looked at my parents. They looked older. They looked fragile. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that the story they had told themselves about their children, the genius son and the plodding daughter, was a fiction. And the truth was sitting right there, cold and rich and silent. Paying for the food they were eating, the money hadn't disappeared. It had just changed hands, and the weight of it was crushing them. The crisis did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in the form of a polite, terrifying email at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. I was already awake, working from the small desk in my hotel room. The subject line read, "Discrepancy in Q3 transaction logs. Urgent." The sender was the Chief Technology Officer of Nexus Logistics, the enterprise client that Gavin had paraded around like a trophy. The survival contract that was supposed to validate our entire existence. I opened the attachment. It was a spreadsheet highlighting a series of transaction fees. Nexus's internal auditing system showed they owed Vantigrid $3.2 million in processing fees for the quarter. Vantigrid's invoice, which had been sent out 2 days prior, claimed they owed $3.5 million, a $300,000 difference in the world of high-volume logistics, where margins are measured in fractions of a penny. A $300,000 error is not a mistake. It is an insult, and if it is not an insult, it is theft. I called Miller immediately. "Get to the office," I said. "We have a reconciliation breach." By 8 o'clock, the war room was a scene of controlled panic. Gavin was pacing the length of the glass wall, looking pale. Miller was sweating through his dress shirt, furiously typing on his laptop. "It is a glitch," Miller insisted, his voice shaking. "It has to be. The API sometimes double counts the timestamps if the server latency is high. We can explain it. We just tell them it is a technical hiccup, issue a credit note, and move on." "It is not a hiccup," I said. I was looking at the raw SQL queries on the main monitor. "Look at the code. Miller, look at line 402. I pointed to the screen. The billing algorithm, the black box that Gavin claimed was proprietary genius, was programmed to round up every individual transaction fee to the nearest cent before aggregating the total. Standard industry practice is to aggregate the raw totals first, then round the final sum. By rounding up every single microtransaction, Vantigrid was skimming fractions of a penny off millions of trades. It was the kind of thing that generates free cash flow in the short term, but destroys credibility instantly upon discovery. Who authorized this logic? I asked. The room went silent. Gavin stopped pacing. He looked at the floor. It was an optimization strategy. The previous VP of product suggested it. He said it was standard for high-growth SaaS models. It is called aggressive capture. It is called stealing, Gavin, I said, my voice ice-cold. You are overcharging your biggest client by 8% through a hidden rounding function. That is not aggressive capture. That is fraud. We didn't mean to steal, Gavin shouted, his defense mechanism kicking in. It is just math. It is a rounding difference. Math doesn't have intent. Gavin, people do. And right now, Nexus thinks our intent was to rob them. I turned to Miller. I want a full audit of every client contract we have. If this logic is applied to the Nexus account, it is probably applied to everyone. If this gets out, we don't just lose Nexus, we get class actioned into oblivion. Alice, wait, Gavin pleaded. If we audit everyone, we have to restate our revenue. If we restate revenue, the valuation collapses again. Let's just fix it for Nexus. We tell them it was a bug. We refund them. We patch the code quietly tonight. No one else needs to know. I looked at my brother. He was still trying to play poker while the casino was burning down. No, I said. We are not patching it in the dark. We are bringing in a flashlight. I picked up my phone. I am hiring an independent compliance officer, someone from outside. They are going to review the entire billing stack, and we are going to send a formal letter to Nexus admitting the error before they accuse us of it. You are inviting a cop into the building, Gavin yelled. You are going to kill the company to prove a point about ethics. I am killing the lie to save the company, I replied. By noon, the independent auditor was in the building. Her name was Sarah, a former forensic accountant for the SEC, who now ran a private consultancy. She was expensive, $600 an hour, but she was the only shield we had left. Gavin hated her on sight. To him, she represented everything he despised: rules, limits, and the dry, unglamorous reality of consequences. Sarah spent 4 hours in the server room with the lead engineer. When she emerged, she didn't look happy. She walked into the war room, placed a thin folder on the table, and looked at me. The rounding error is the least of your problems, she said. My stomach dropped. What else is there? Revenue recognition, Sarah said. I looked at the timestamps for the last 3 quarters. You guys are booking implementation fees as recognized revenue the moment the contract is signed. But the contracts state that implementation is a 6-month process. Under standard accounting rules, you have to amortize that revenue over the life of the service. She pointed to a chart. You have recognized $1.2 million in revenue that you haven't earned yet. If you adjust for this, your last 2 quarters weren't profitable. They were losses, deep losses. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. It is a gray area, Gavin muttered. Everyone does it. It is how you show growth velocity. It is not gray. Mr. Ross, Sarah said sharply. It is black and white, and if you go for a Series C round with these books, the due diligence team will flag this on day 1. If you had gone public with these numbers, you would be looking at jail time. I sat back in my chair. The success of Vantigrid was a hologram. It was projected from a broken machine. Okay, I said. Here is what we do. We restate. Are you insane? Gavin slammed his hand on the table. If we restate earnings now, we look incompetent. The industry will laugh at us. Better they laugh at us for being incompetent than arrest us for being criminals, I said. Sarah, draft the restatement. Miller, prepare a communication plan for the board and the investors. I forbid it, Gavin said. He stood up, trying to summon the authority he no longer possessed. I am the CEO. I decide what we communicate. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him with the exhausted patience of a parent dealing with a toddler holding a match. Gavin, I said, you are the CEO of a company that is currently technically insolvent and operating on my bridge loan. The only reason you are still sitting in that chair is because I haven't fired you yet. Do not confuse my patience with weakness. Gavin looked around the room. He looked at Miller. He looked at Sarah. He looked for an ally, someone who would tell him that the rules didn't apply to visionaries. He found no one. Miller looked down at his shoes. Sarah looked at him with professional boredom. Fine, Gavin whispered. Burn it down. See if I care. He stormed out of the room. The next 48 hours were a nightmare. The office split into factions. The rumors flew. The new investor is a witch. She is tearing apart the books. She is trying to destroy Gavin. The Gavin loyalists, mostly the sales team, and the few remaining marketing hires glared at me in the break room. They whispered when I walked by. They saw me as the cold fund lady who didn't understand the magic of the startup hustle. But the engineers watched me differently. They saw me sitting with Sarah, reviewing lines of code. They saw me asking intelligent questions about database latency. They realized that for the first time in the company's history, someone in charge actually cared about the product working correctly, not just selling it. On Friday morning, we held the all-hands meeting. The entire staff, about 40 people, left after the layoffs gathered in the open plan area. Gavin stood off to the side, arms crossed, refusing to take the microphone. I stepped forward. I wasn't wearing my suit today. I was wearing jeans and a blouse. I wanted to look like a human being, not an executioner. "We have had a difficult week," I began. My voice echoed slightly in the quiet room. "We discovered a discrepancy in our billing logic. It was an error that overcharged our clients, and we discovered that our accounting practices were overly optimistic." I saw the sales team exchanging looks. Here it comes. They were thinking, the spin. "We are not going to spin this," I said. "We are fixing it. We have already credited Nexus Logistics for the full amount plus interest. We are auditing every other account, and we are restating our earnings for the year to reflect reality." A hand went up in the back. It was one of the senior developers. "Does that mean our stock options are worthless?" he asked. "It means your stock options are real," I answered. "Before today, they were based on a lie. A lie is worth 0. Today, the valuation is lower. Yes, but it is solid. It is based on cash that actually exists. We are done pretending. From now on, Vantigrid operates on truth. If we make $1, we report $1. If we lose a client, we own it. We are going to be boring. We are going to be transparent. And we are going to survive." There was no applause. There was no cheering. But there was a collective exhale. The tension that had defined the culture, the constant pressure to hide bad news, to inflate numbers, to smile when the ship was sinking evaporated. They didn't love me, but they believed me. That afternoon, I had the call with Nexus. I sat in the conference room with the speakerphone in the center of the table. Gavin sat opposite me, silent. "We received your letter," the Nexus CTO said. His voice was hard. "Admitting the rounding error was a bold move, Ms. Ross. Usually, vendors try to bury that in a service credit." "We aren't interested in burying things," I said. "We value the partnership more than the pennies." "We appreciate the refund," the CTO continued, "but trust is a fragile currency. You broke it." "I know," I said. "How do we earn it back?" There was a long pause on the line. 60 days, the CTO said. "We are putting you on a probationary period. For the next 60 days, we want full transparency. We want read access to your billing logs. We want weekly reconciliation meetings. If there is a discrepancy of even 1 cent in the next 2 months, we pull the contract, and we tell the market why." "Agreed," I said without hesitation. "And one more thing," the CTO added. "We want to know who is signing off on the data. We don't trust the previous management." I looked at Gavin. He flinched. "I am signing off," I said. "Personally, my name will be on the weekly report." "Fine. You have 60 days. Clock starts now." The line clicked dead. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. We were alive. We were on life support. But we had a pulse. Gavin looked at me. For the first time all week, his expression wasn't angry. It was something else. Confusion mixed with a begrudging, painful realization. "You told them," he said softly. "You told them I messed up." "I told them we messed up," I corrected. I used the word we every time. "Gavin, I took the hit with you." He shook his head slowly. "I built this brand on being flawless, on being the next big thing, and you just went in there and told them we are flawed." "And they signed the renewal," I said. "Because people forgive flaws. Gavin, they don't forgive being lied to." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the river. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the office. "You are rewriting it," he said, his voice barely audible. "Rewriting what?" "Me," he said. "My image. Everyone looked at me like I was a genius. Now they look at me like I am a liability that you are managing. You are turning me into a child. Alice, I am not turning you into anything," I said, standing up and gathering my papers. "I am just turning on the lights. Whatever you see in the mirror now, that was always there. You just refuse to look at it." I walked to the door. 60 days. "Gavin," I said, "we have 60 days to prove we are real. I suggest you get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start auditing the sales commissions." I left him alone in the room. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a long, beautiful dream to find himself in a cold, hard bed, and he was terrified that he might never be able to fall asleep again. The silence in the office following the Nexus audit was deceptive. On the surface, Vantigrid was a company in recovery. We were reconciling accounts. The engineers were patching the billing code, and the sales team was learning to pitch the product without lying about its capabilities. But data has a rhythm, and when the rhythm breaks, it usually means someone is trying to hide a new signal. I noticed the anomaly on a Tuesday, 10 days into our 60-day probation period. Gavin's calendar, which I had access to, showed a series of blocks marked personal dentist and gym. Normally, I wouldn't track a CEO's dental hygiene, but the geolocation metadata from his company phone told a different story. He wasn't at his dentist in West Austin. He was in a high-rise building on Congress Avenue, spending 3 hours at a time on the 14th floor. I looked up the tenant list for the 14th floor. It wasn't a gym. It was the office of BlackRock Canyon Capital, a firm known for distressed debt financing and hostile takeovers. They were sharks. If Northline was a stern parent, BlackRock Canyon was a loan shark with a baseball bat. Then I checked the email logs. Gavin had been smart enough to use his personal Gmail, but he wasn't smart enough to disconnect his laptop from the company server while he did it. The network traffic logs showed large encrypted PDF files being uploaded to an external address. He was shopping the company. He was trying to raise a new round of high-interest debt to buy out Northline's position, regain his super voting shares, and kick me out before I could finish the restructuring. He was trying to fire his rescuer because the rescue felt too much like a cage. I waited until 7 o'clock that evening. Most of the staff had gone home. The cleaners were vacuuming the open plan area. Gavin was in his office, the door closed, likely drafting his pitch deck for the Sharks. I walked in. I carried nothing but my phone. Gavin looked up, startled. He quickly minimized the window on his screen. "Alice," he said, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "I thought you headed back to the hotel. Long day, right?" "It is a long day," I agreed. "Especially when you spend 3 hours at the BlackRock Canyon offices instead of the gym." Gavin's face went slack. The fake smile dropped, replaced by a flash of pure cornered panic. He stood up, his chair rolling back and hitting the credenza. "I don't know what you are talking about," he stammered. "Stop it, Gavin," I said. My voice was quiet, weary. "I see the traffic logs. I see the location data. You are trying to raise a leveraged buyout round. You are trying to take on debt at, 15% interest? Maybe 20? Just to buy out Northline so you can be the king again." He stared at me for a long moment, breathing hard. Then, the pretense shattered. He didn't deny it anymore. He just got angry. "It is my company," he shouted. "I built it. You came in here and hijacked it. You are stripping it down. You are making me look like a middle manager in my own building. I am taking it back." "You are digging a grave," I said. "Do you know what BlackRock Canyon does? They don't want your growth. They want your assets. They will lend you the money, let you default in 6 months because you can't service the debt, and then they will strip the IP and sell it for parts. They will kill Vantigrid." "At least I will die on my feet," Gavin yelled. "At least I won't be living under your thumb, asking for permission to buy a stapler." "You are not living under my thumb," I said. "You are living under the consequences of your own actions. And by the way, you can't sell." I walked over to the whiteboard on his wall and picked up a marker. "Did you read the term sheet, Gavin, the one you signed without looking?" I wrote a number on the board, 3X. Clause 9, Section C. I recited. "Change of control provision. If the company attempts to buy out the Series B investor that is me within 12 months of the closing date, the penalty is 3 times the investment value. You don't owe me $2 million. Gavin, you owe me $6 million. I capped the marker. "BlackRock won't lend you $6 million against a company with your balance sheet. You are stuck with me." Gavin looked at the number on the board. He looked at me. His hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with a visceral, vibrating frustration. "Why are you doing this?" he hissed. You have the money. You made your point. You proved you are smarter than me. You proved you are the secret genius. Congratulations. Alice, you won. Why can't you just take your win and leave me alone? I am not trying to win, I said. I am trying to keep you from destroying yourself. Bullshit, he screamed. You love this. You love seeing me small. You love walking into this office in your suit and giving orders. You have been waiting 30 years for this. You were always the quiet one, the boring one. And now you get to hold the whip. Is that what you think? I asked. You think this gives me pleasure. Doesn't it? He challenged. Admit it. You want to see me fail so you can feel big. I looked at my brother. I looked past the anger, past the shouting, and I saw the terrified architecture of his soul. I don't care about being big, Gavin, I said softly. I never did. That is the difference between us. Gavin laughed. A bitter, broken sound. Right. The saintly Alice. You don't care about credit. You just anonymously fund companies and control them from the shadows. You are a hypocrite. I do it because I like the work, I said. I like the math. I like the puzzle. I don't need the applause. I need the applause. The confession ripped out of him before he could stop it. It hung in the air. Raw and shocking, Gavin slumped against the desk. He looked deflated, the energy draining out of him as the truth finally hit the floor. I need it, he whispered, his voice cracking. I need Dad to look at me and see a winner. That is the only thing I have ever been. Alice, the winner, the golden boy. If I am not that, then who am I? I am just nothing. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. You don't understand, he said. You never needed him to look at you that way. You were fine being in the corner with your books. But me, if I am not dazzling them, I feel like I'm disappearing. And you coming in here, fixing my mess, being the adult, it proves that I'm a fraud. Every time you make a good decision, it reminds me that I made a bad one. I hate you for it. I hate you because you don't need the stage, and I can't live without it. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I stood there, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief. The resentment wasn't about money. It wasn't about the company. It was about the terrifying hollowness inside him that he had been trying to fill with venture capital and accolades. You aren't a fraud, Gavin, I said. You are just a man who isn't as good at math as he is at sales, and that is okay. But you have to stop trying to be the hero. Heroes die. Operators survive. I walked closer to him. Here's the deal, I said. I am not going to let you sell to BlackRock. I am not going to let you destroy the company to save your ego, but I am not going to humiliate you publicly either. I laid out the terms I had prepared in my head. We are hiring a new CFO, I said. Someone external, someone I trust, but who reports to the board, not just to me. You step back from all financial controls. You hand over the checkbook completely. In exchange, you stay on as the public face. You do the podcasts. You do the conferences. You handle the vision. But the execution belongs to the operators. Gavin wiped his face with his sleeve. And if I say no, if you say no, I said, I exercise my right to fire you for cause based on the Nexus fraud. I remove you from the board, and I tell Dad exactly why. He flinched. The threat of telling Dad the truth about the fraud and the lease was the nuclear option. You would do that, he asked. You would let the company crash just to stop me. I would let your illusion crash, I said. The company will be fine. The company is just code and people. It is your ego that is the liability. He stared at the floor for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Fine, he whispered. Do it. Hire the CFO. Good, I said. We interview candidates on Monday. I left the office, but I didn't go back to the hotel. I drove to the airport and took the last flight to Phoenix. I needed to close the loop. I arrived at my parents' house at 1 a.m. The lights were off, but I knew my father often sat up late on the patio when he couldn't sleep. I found him there, sitting in the dark, staring at the pool. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the moon. "Alice," he said, not turning around. He didn't sound surprised. "I had a feeling you might come by." I pulled up a chair and sat next to him. We sat in silence for a while, the desert air cooling around us. "The landlord called me," Dad said. His voice was heavy, old. "He told me the lease was terminated. He told me the personal guarantee was released. He said, 'Ms. Ross handled it.'" I didn't say anything. "I didn't tell your mother," he continued. "She thinks everything is just business as usual. She thinks Gavin is fixing things." "It is better that way," I said. Dad turned to look at me. In the moonlight, he looked tired. The confident patriarch who handed out cars and advice was gone. In his place was a father who had realized he had bet on the wrong horse, and worse, that he had ignored the other one. "I signed that guarantee," he said, "because I thought he couldn't fail. I thought Gavin had something special, a spark. I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be the father who backed the winner." He paused, his hands clasping together. "And when I looked at you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I saw myself, the boring parts, the safe parts. I didn't want to celebrate that. I wanted to celebrate the magic." "There is no magic, Dad," I said. "There is just work." "I know that now," he said. "You paid a lot of money to fix his mistake, Alice, a lot of money." "I can afford it," I said simply. He looked at me with a question in his eyes that was painful to witness. "Do you despise me?" he asked. "For betting against you, for not seeing you." I thought about the years of financial amateur jokes. I thought about the $100 bill he had tried to press into my hand 2 weeks ago. I thought about the way he looked at Gavin like he was the sun. "I don't despise you, Dad," I said. "I just realized a long time ago that you were looking for something I didn't want to be. You wanted a show. I wanted a life." He nodded slowly. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak. "Thank you," he said, "for saving him, and for saving me." "I am not done saving him yet," I said, standing up. "We have 50 days left on the probation clock. If we don't hit the transparency targets, the company dies. And if the company dies, Gavin breaks. I need you to do something for me." "Anything," he said. "Stop asking him if he is winning," I said. "Stop asking about the valuation. Stop asking about the exit. Just ask him if he did good work today. Ask him if he told the truth. He needs to know that he can be ordinary and still be your son." Dad looked at the pool, tears shining in his eyes. "I can do that." I flew back to Austin the next morning. The final countdown had begun. We had 50 days. The threat of Black Rock Canyon was gone. But the internal rot was still healing. The culture was fragile. The staff was watching Gavin, waiting to see if he would relapse into his old habits of exaggeration and hype. I walked into the office. Gavin was at his desk. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't looking at a dashboard of vanity metrics. He was reading a customer support ticket log. He looked up when I entered. He looked tired, stripped of his armor, but he was there. "I reviewed the ticket backlog," he said, his voice flat. "We have a bug in the reporting module. Clients are complaining." "I know," I said. "We are patching it Thursday." "Okay," he said. He hesitated, then looked me in the eye. "I canceled the gym membership." "Good," I said. "We have work to do." I sat down at my temporary desk and opened my laptop. The clock was ticking. Nexus was watching. The market was watching. And for the first time, my brother was actually working instead of performing. We might just make it, or we might not. But at least now, the failure wouldn't be a lie. Day 58 arrived with the weight of a guillotine blade hovering just above our necks. The air in the Austin conference room was so thin it felt difficult to breathe. This was the deadline. The probationary period with Nexus Logistics was over. And at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, their entire executive team walked through our glass doors to deliver their verdict. If they signed the renewal, Vantigrid would survive, the revenue would stabilize, the market would see a vote of confidence from a major player, and we would have a future. If they walked away, The reputational damage would be terminal. In the tight-knit world of enterprise fintech, losing your anchor client after a public admission of billing errors is a death sentence. I sat at the end of the table, not at the head. I had ceded that spot back to Gavin for the optical benefit of the client. But everyone in the room knew where the gravity came from. Across from us sat the Nexus Chief Technology Officer and their Chief Financial Officer. They looked unreadable. They had their laptops open, displaying the audit logs from the last 8 weeks. Gavin was vibrating. I could feel the energy radiating off him, the desperate need to fill the silence, to charm, to sell. For 10 years, that had been his only move. When in doubt, dazzle them. So, Gavin started, leaning forward with his trademark smile, though it looked brittle around the edges. Before we dive into the boring numbers, I just want to say that the vision for the next quarter is incredible. We are looking at implementing AI-driven predictive caching that will blow your mind. It is going to change the paradigm of how you... Gavin, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a command. Gavin stopped mid-sentence. He looked at me, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, followed immediately by fear. He remembered the agreement. He remembered who saved him. Today is not a pitch, I said, looking him in the eye and then turning to the Nexus executives. We are not here to sell you a vision of the future. We are here to verify the reality of the present. You asked for 60 days of transparency. We are here to show you exactly what that looks like. I nodded to the new Chief Financial Officer, a man named David, whom I had installed 3 weeks prior. David was the antithesis of Gavin. He was quiet, meticulous, and incapable of exaggeration. David, I said, the floor is yours. David stood up and connected his laptop to the screen. There were no flashy graphics. There were no rocket ship emojis. There were just rows of data, clean and white against a black background. For the last 8 weeks, David began, his voice steady. Our reconciliation error rate was 0.00%. We have provided your team with real-time read access to the SQL database. We have flagged 3 potential latency issues before they affected your billing, and we issued preemptive credit notes for all of them, totaling $42.50. The Nexus Chief Financial Officer raised an eyebrow. You issued a credit note for $42. Accuracy is not a function of size, I interjected. It is a function of discipline. If we can't be trusted with $40, we cannot be trusted with $4 million. David continued. He showed the new revenue recognition protocols. He showed the compliance audit from the external firm. He showed the server logs. It was the most boring presentation I had ever seen, and it was beautiful. When he finished, the room fell silent again. Gavin looked like he wanted to jump out of his skin. He was terrified that boring meant failed. The Nexus Chief Technology Officer closed his laptop. He looked at Gavin. Then he looked at me. We came in here today ready to pull the plug, he said honestly. Most vendors who get caught with their hand in the cookie jar try to talk their way out of it. They send gift baskets. They promise new features. He tapped his finger on the table. You guys sent us spreadsheets of $40 errors. You didn't try to impress us. You just did the work. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick document. It was the renewal contract. We are signing, he said, 3-year term, and we are adding the European division to the scope. That will double the transaction volume. Gavin let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. Thank you, Gavin whispered. You won't regret it. We know we won't, the Nexus executive said, because we also spoke to our partners at Global Freight. They are looking for a new payment processor. We told them to call you. We told them you are the only honest shop in town. I felt a small, tight knot in my chest loosen. It was done. We hadn't just saved the client. We had turned the crisis into a competitive advantage. In a market full of hype, we had become the safe harbor. 3 days later, the offer came in. Because of the Nexus renewal and the referral. A major strategic competitor, a legacy bank looking to modernize, sent a letter of intent. They wanted to invest $10 million for a minority stake. It wasn't a rescue round. It wasn't vulture capital like BlackRock Canyon. The valuation was fair. It was based on a multiple of actual revenue, not imaginary potential. It was the kind of deal that makes a company grown up. We held a board meeting to discuss the offer. Gavin stood at the head of the table. He was wearing a suit, but he wasn't wearing the tie. He looked different. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a somber grounding. He looked at the term sheet. 6 months ago, he would have scoffed at the valuation. He would have demanded double. He would have given a speech about how we were the next unicorn. "The valuation is fair," Gavin said quietly. "It reflects who we are today." He looked up at the board members. He looked at David, the new chief financial officer. Finally, he looked at me. "I have something to say," Gavin said. He placed his hands on the back of his chair, gripping the leather. "For the last 5 years, I thought my job was to be the biggest person in the room. I thought that if I wasn't selling, I was dying. I treated the truth like it was a variable I could adjust to fit the narrative." He paused, swallowing hard. "I was wrong. I mistook arrogance for courage. I thought Alice was weak because she was cautious. But she wasn't weak. She was prepared. And I wasn't brave. I was just reckless with other people's livelihoods." He took a deep breath. "I recommend we accept the investment, and I recommend we formally adopt the control structures Northline has put in place as permanent bylaws. I don't want to run this company without guardrails ever again." The vote was unanimous that Sunday. I went back to Scottsdale. It was the first family dinner since the truth had started to leak out. But tonight, the air was different. There was no tension of secrets kept. There was only the raw, exposed nerves of a family trying to figure out how to be a family without the props. My father met me at the door. He didn't offer me money for gas. He just hugged me. It was a real hug. Firm and desperate. The kind of hug a parent gives when they realize how close they came to losing everything. We sat at the table. The roast beef was the same. But the conversation was new. Gavin didn't talk about the new valuation. He didn't talk about his car. He talked about the code audit. He talked about the new compliance officer, Sarah, and how she was driving him crazy but making the product better. "It sounds like hard work," my mother said, pouring water. "It is," Gavin said. "It is exhausting, but I sleep better." He picked up his glass of wine. He looked at the table, then he looked directly at me. "You know," Gavin said, addressing our parents, "you guys always called Alice the financial amateur, the hobbyist." My father flinched. "Gavin, we don't need to." "No, Dad, we do." Gavin interrupted gently. "We really do. Because you were wrong. Alice isn't the amateur. I am." He gestured around the room, as if encompassing the house, the cars, the lifestyle he had chased his whole life. "I played finance like it was a performance art," Gavin said. "I played it like a casino. Alice played it like an engineer. She built a foundation while I was building a parade float. And when the wind blew, my float fell over, and her foundation is the only reason we are all sitting here eating this food." My mother put her hand to her mouth. A single tear tracked down her cheek, ruining her perfect foundation, and she didn't even move to wipe it away. "I am sorry," my father said. His voice broke. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked at me. "I am so sorry, Alice." "It is okay, Dad," I said. "We fixed it." "No," he shook his head. "It is not okay. I made you feel like you were less because you weren't loud. I turned this family into a scoreboard. I wanted you to compete for my attention, and I picked the wrong metrics. I loved you both, but I loved you poorly. I loved you for what you could show me, not for who you were." "We are all learning, Robert," my mother whispered, reaching for his hand. "I am proud of you, Alice," Dad said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I had never seen before. "Not because you are rich. I don't care about the money anymore. I am proud of you because you were strong enough to save us even when we didn't deserve it." I looked down at my plate. The anger I had carried for decades, the cold. hard stone in my chest finally cracked. It didn't disappear, but it lost its weight. "I didn't do it for the thanks," I said, my voice thick. "I did it because you are my brother, Gavin, even if you are an idiot sometimes." Gavin laughed. It was a real laugh. "I am a massive idiot, but I am a solvent idiot now." Later that night, as we were leaving, Gavin walked me to my rental car. The desert sky was full of stars. "So," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "the board thinks I should stay on as chief executive officer. David thinks we can work together." "I agree with them," I said. "You are good at the vision. Gavin, you are good with people. You just need a leash." "And you are holding it?" he asked. "David holds the checkbook," I said. "The board holds the strategy. I am just the investor. I am going back to Milwaukee. I have a report on municipal bonds due next week." "You are going back?" he asked, surprised. "You run the company, Alice. You could move to Austin. You could take the corner office." "I don't want the corner office," I said. "I like my life. I like my quiet apartment. I like my anonymity. You can keep the spotlight. Gavin, just make sure the bill is paid for the electricity." He smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. "You are a strange person, Alice Ross." "I am a professional," I corrected him. He held out his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, equal, no longer the big brother patronizing the little sister, just two operators acknowledging the deal. "One last toast," he asked, raising an imaginary glass to the night sky. "To funding, it almost disappeared." "Funding doesn't disappear, Gavin," I said, opening my car door. "It just moves." "To where?" he asked. "To the loudest voice." I looked at him, then back at the house where our parents were finally sleeping peacefully, safe from a ruin they would never fully understand. "No," I said, getting into the car and starting the engine. "Money only follows the truth." I drove away, leaving the golden boy in the driveway. He looked smaller in the rearview mirror, but for the first time, he looked real. And as I turned onto the highway, heading back to my quiet, boring, magnificent life, I realized that was the only return on investment I had ever really wanted. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey of redemption, strategy, and the hard truths of family dynamics. I would love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from right now? Are you listening during your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Drop a comment below and let's connect. Please consider subscribing to Maya Revenge Stories, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear that sometimes. The quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards.